Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. Today's video specifically, what we're going to be talking about is managing user accounts. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the managing local user accounts where we discussed how to create local users. We've also gotten a video about how to create and manage groups. Now we're going to talk about how to manage local users. So let's keep in mind that all user information is contained in a Unix text file in etc password. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if we cat out etc password, we'll see, as we've talked about in previous videos, it's got information here. It's got username, with numeric user ID, the numeric group ID, the full name if it's available, a home directory, login shell, and it used to contain the password. Now passwords are contained in modern distributions in etc shadow. There's the second field used to be where the password is. It simply contains an X character, which lets any system know that is looking for a set UID as a particular user, that it looks for the password in the etc shadow file. So if we cat the etc shadow file, what we'll see is a listing of users that matches password, but then it has information about the password. The only user right now that currently has a password on the system we're logged into is the user, because that's who we're logged in as and that's who we've set a password. And as you'll see, this particular password looks to be a pretty complex password, but it's a hash value password that's encrypted. So this particular password, there's no way to tell how complex or uncomplex it is because of the way that it's obfuscated inside of the account. So we've got the user account and we've got the root account that have passwords. Everything else, you'll notice, doesn't have any passwords associated with it. So on most systems, when we look at the etc password, it's simply fine to let the system determine the user and the group ID. And in fact, when we were doing our user and group ID videos, we didn't make any changes to those. You can manually make changes to them once you've created a user, as long as it matches what's in the password directory between this and the shadow, then we'll be able to link those together. So I could change my Ubuntu or my user ID from 1001 to 1011 as long as those two things match. Then when I go to log in the next time, those user IDs will be consistent. However, I'd have to make sure that afterwards, as a root user, I reset the home directories, which are going to then be unlinked to anything that I've created because they will be linked to a user ID 1001 that doesn't currently exist. So just keep in mind, if you make manual changes from within here, which you can do, you'll have to go back and fix permissions as a sudo or root user so that those permissions are established using the new ID, and you'll notice that permissions will be on the old ID that you'll have to change. So additionally to that, in the etc directory, there are a couple of files and directories that affect how we manage a user. For example, let's take a look at the bash rc file. And this becomes, when you create a user using the user add or the add user command, it becomes what becomes the .bash rc. And this particular one is a system-wide .bash rc if nothing exists in the user's home directory to override it. So if you want system-wide configuration items or script pieces to run when a user logs in, this is a good place to run it. Additionally, there's an entire directory called SKEL, or often referred to as the skeleton directory, that contains the files that will automatically, when a new user is created, are initialized from this particular directory. And then you can create files that'll provide default environment for users. For example, in the .profile, we might set the editor environment variable to nano versus vi, so that an application looking for that environment variable automatically starts up the nano text editor. But you really want to keep the skeleton directory as small as possible, because what happens is, although these files are initialized when you create a user, if you make any changes, they're not automatically pushed to existing users. So the only thing that you could do there would be to manually copy those files, and then you risk clobbering any user-specific configurations that a user has done on their own files that they own within their home directory. So it's better to put global configuration into global files, such as Etsy profile. So let's go down and look at Etsy profile. So if we edit the profile file, this would be if I wanted to put global configuration information that I wanted every user to have anytime they logged into, and then anytime I make a change, the very next time a user logs in, they'll receive this global profile, unless of course, they still can override it in their local configuration. But at that point, that's just something that that you have to live with. A user could override, for example, the bash or the prompt on their local configuration, but I could at least set it globally here so that it got reset anytime anybody logged in. Finally, there's a way to create a user by hand. So let's go ahead and do that, because we didn't look at how to create a user by hand because there are utilities to do it. But if I wanted to create a user by hand, I could do so with a couple of applications and knowing the process that I need to use. As the root user, I'm going to execute a program called VIPW, which is VI for password. All I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new line. So let's go down here, and we will add a test user. Make sure you remember what you named the user. X, let's call that user 1002 because we don't have any additional users on the system, and 1001 is the last user ID that I've gotten. We're going to give it the same group number. We need to match the user above it, so we're going to do comma, 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 and then we're going to do home test user or colon, and then give it a bin bash for the shell prompt that user gets. And then we'll go ahead and save this file and exit. Now remember, we need to modify the Etsy shadow for consistency, but hang on a second. We're going to edit the group file as well. So let's do VIGR. So we need to create the new group, and remember we have the group 1002. So what we need to do is say test user colon X colon 1002 colon, and then save our file. Now we've got the password and group files entered. So now we need to create the home directory of the user with the make directory command, and this is one of the reasons why we're root. And then we'll copy files from the Etsy SKEL directory to the new home directory and change the ownership. So let's go to the home directory, and we'll make a directory called test user. We'll see that right now it's owned by root, so we need to be careful about how that is. So we need to change the ownership of the test user directory to the test user and group, and we need it to be sure that it has everything recursively. But let's save ourselves some steps here first and go to the test user directory. So let's copy the files from the Etsy SKEL directory. So copy -rf Etsy SKEL, and we see that we have the bash logout, bash rc, and profile files copied. Let's go ahead and clear that. Now that we've got those there, what we want to do is we'll drop down a directory, and we'll go to do what we were talking about earlier. So we'll change the owner recursively, so everything within that directory will change to test user dot test user, and this is the username and group of the test user directory. And now if we look at it, we see that test user now owns the test user direct name and directory, and we'll see that .bash logout and .bash rc are owned by the test user. If we look at our user account, we'll see that it matches bash history, bash log or bash logout, and bash RC. And there's also a profile in there, but we haven't created a cache directory because we haven't logged into that particular user yet. So now all we have to do is we need to set the password, which will update. If you'll notice, when we saved the files, the password, we were told that we might need to update the password, shadow password file for the groups as well as the user. But since we haven't set a password for this user yet, all we're going to do is do a password and test user. We'll create a new password, and then we'll exit here. We'll do an su-test user, and then from su-test user we should then be prompted for the password, and we are now in the test user directory, and we've created our user manually. Now, as we've talked about when we have the process down for adding a user, all of this stuff can be automated, but it's always a good idea to know how to manipulate your users, your file ownership, etc. By hand, so that if, for example, the utility is gone or there's a problem with the system, you know how to recreate manually all the steps on your Linux system for your local users. That's all there is to managing user accounts. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.